You guys ready? Awesome. So we have a smaller group today. So A, you'll have to tell me if I stray too far from the mic. And B, feel free to interrupt at any time. There's not that many of us, so you can yell, "You're wrong," and we can start a discussion. I'm happy with that. So good to see you all here. I've met some of you already, hope to meet the rest of you, and have had a great time at this conference so far. So hope to continue the conversation. So I'm here to talk about Hire, Train, Deploy, a new model for skills-based hiring. But first, the quick bio. I'm with two firms, investment firms in the education and future of work world, University Ventures and Achieve Partners. We like to run two separate firms under two headings for maximum confusion. It's the same team. And you'll see some of the folks we work with here today. So Credly, Portfolium, and we've been under either banner writing about, thinking about future of work, future of talent for a long time. So I put up some of my favorite collaborations. I like to complain about how resumes are terrible in Bloomberg. We've worked with Talent Tech Labs and others. So before we kind of dive into Hire, Train, Deploy, I want to talk about where we think we're at post-COVID, if that exists. There are two stories I consistently hear about the post-COVID impact on the talent market. Story number one is up here. The workers won. We did it. We have unprecedented leverage. The Great Resignation has created worker bonuses, promotions, remote packages, paychecks, and particularly in tech, but not only in tech, the workers are winning. We have a next generation of leverage over the employers. That's story number one. It's our lucky day to be employed. Story number two. So why can't I find a good job? We have a record 10.9 million open jobs and 6.5 million unemployed. That's a number we talk about. The numbers we often don't talk about are about 5.7 million who've dropped out of the workforce entirely. They're not in the workforce, they want to be a part of it. And then I have a question mark here for underemployment. We don't know what the underemployment number is post-COVID. Before COVID, it was estimated at, say, 20 million. But these are people who are employed in jobs that are not at the level of their skill sets, their credentials, their degrees. And it's not just an abstract problem designation. It's a real problem. They make about $10,000 less a year than fully employed counterparts, peers with the same degrees, and that $10,000 compounds. They're more likely to be underemployed 5 years later, about 2 out of 3, and 50% of them are underemployed in 10 years, about as long as life as these studies go. So we have 6.5 million unemployed, 5.7 out of the workforce, and a big question mark for who is still underemployed. So I like to back up the metrics with, technology's culture hub. So I turn to Reddit, and here's what people are saying about employment today. If software engineering, so this is tech, right, where we're lucky to be employed, if software engineering is in demand, why is it so hard to get a software job? Or haven't been able to get a job after graduating with a CS degree, continually pressured to attend a boot camp. And we'll talk about boot camps later. This is a Washington Post article. The struggle is real, right? Why are Americans being left behind in the top job market? And this particularly impacts underrepresented communities to begin with, right? The unemployment and underemployment deluge hurts women, it hurts underrepresented minorities, it hurts low-income communities the most. So to figure out what's happening, right, why we've got a great resignation and massive unemployment, underemployment, it helps to figure out who's really got the leverage, right? Who's resigning for something better. So I'll out myself as a millennial, going through this age chart of resignations in the workforce, in case it wasn't obvious. Who's really resigning? Well, it's not young people aged 20 to 25. There's actually a decrease in resignations from young people since pre-COVID, 2020. And it's not older people, age 60 plus. they've also decreased in resignations. In fact, they've been taking every paycheck available, many pushing off retirement. So who's resigning? The 20% increase that's driving the Great Resignation is mid-career people, age 30 to 45, with some spill-off earlier and later. These are people with enough experience to move up or laterally elsewhere in the workforce, but not too much experience that moving jobs is actually starting over. So let's figure out why. I think it helps to start with, right, what worked? What was the career path for the people who have accrued leverage in the talent marketplace? So this is a picture in some form we've all seen. It's the American dream. You go to high school, you proceed to higher education, a 2-year degree or a 4-year degree, and that gets you your first great job, which gets you your second job and your third job until you continually accrue leverage that you can use later when you want a cushy remote package. This is yesterday's career path. This is today's career path. We're still trying to use the same model, linear progression from high school to college to career, but there's massive breakage in the middle. And this breakage I'll talk about, I'll call the 3 crises. There's a crisis of completion, failure to complete this pathway. There's a crisis of cost, the cost and the opportunity cost, the time it takes to proceed through this pathway. And there's a crisis of careers. The pathway's not delivering what it used to deliver, what we think it should deliver. So to start with completion, I think most folks in the room know these statistics, right? We have a leaky pipeline. Only 40% of high schoolers enroll in college or some form of higher education. The other 60% are often invisible in discussions about what the future of work looks like. Of those 40% who enroll, 60% complete within 6 years. And those numbers are much worse, not only for low-income students, for first-gen students, for underrepresented minority students, but for all the pathways that are actually deliberately targeting those students. Your graduation rate at a 2-year public college is about 40%. You're more likely than not to drop out. Your graduation rate as an underrepresented minority is something like 40 to 50%. So we have a crisis of completion. And then there's cost. So the one thing folks do know about millennials, my generation, is we're the student loan generation. Student loans are all the rage, and not for good reasons, right? The average 4-year degree costs $35K a year. There's 40 million plus borrowers averaging about 40K in debt each. That debt number has grown 800% by household within the recent period, obviously dramatically higher than wages. There's now over 1.75 trillion in debt, and 1 million new borrowers default every single year. Worse, even those who haven't defaulted, right, who aren't showing up in the default numbers, only 57% of borrowers today are current, are actually keeping up with their loan payments. That means everybody else is falling behind, and that's compounding. We've talked cost. Cost wouldn't be terrible if the ROI was there, right? If after you paid, if after you completed, you spent 2 to 4 years in a seat learning, you got that great first job. But what's happening, this is a Strata Burning Glass report, 4 in 10 students who actually make it through that pipeline and graduate into underemployment. So they're earning 10K less a year. They're 2/3 underemployed within 5 years, 50% likely to be underemployed within 10 years. And again, that compounds. So your first job drives the rest of your career path. If you don't accrue leverage in job 1, you keep falling behind. And this is a vicious cycle, right? So young people report that they're taking any job that they can get their hands on in order to pay back student debt. So they're not waiting for the great job, they're taking the first acceptable job, and they're starting to make back those loan payments. This has naturally created unprecedented happiness, and I think, unhappiness, And I think we're all seeing it culturally, right? Politically, culturally, we're talking about the death of the American dream. People seriously believe that higher education is supposed to deliver something that it's not delivering. So I won't read all of these, but some of these stats. Only half of alumni agree that investment in higher ed was a good one, and that's 38% of young alumni. 30% would sell an organ to get rid of debt, which is disturbing. Millennials are behind in all metrics: wealth, housing, income creation, and new business creation. And parents are in the same boat. They've often put out money for their kids' education. Only 21% say cost is justified. In 2005, you had a massive amount of young adults who moved out of home. Now they're all moving back. They're moving back with their families. And 76% of parents who have a child at home would pay up to, I believe the number is what, $24,000 to get them out of the house, which is amazing. So you have this serious question among students, parents: what happened to the American dream? And before we say, well, college isn't for that, we're not about that, students don't think that. Students go to college for one reason, and this may be one of the biggest changes in higher education since 2000. In 2000, you had 50% of matriculants tell colleges that they were there for primarily income or job reasons. The other 50% are there to become good citizens, to learn, to have fun. Today, that number is 90% plus in survey after survey. Students are going to higher education institutions to get a job, but they're not getting it. So why aren't they getting it? There's many reasons, but the two big ones on the employment side are how technology has changed how we hire. So there's two big reasons. First, the nature of what is considered an entry-level job has changed. The job looks different. And second, employers are hiring differently. Technology has automated hiring in ways that don't work with our traditional model. So to talk about number one, technology has changed the entry-level job. The entry-level job used to be manual. You did the work, you learned, you grew, you did all of the grunt work and the gritty stuff that helped you learn how the industry worked. But today, those roles have been automated. Entry-level jobs are not manual, they are technical. And that is true not just in tech, but across industries. And so you'll see here, these are assessments of job descriptions. And they'll tell you that specific technical skills are requested on job descriptions across industries more likely and with more frequency than cognitive and soft skills. Entry-level jobs need tech skills. So what are those tech skills? Well, these are the platforms that have automated some of that entry-level work, and they're different by industry and sometimes different by vertical. In sales, it's Salesforce, HubSpot. In customer success, it's Zendesk. In healthcare IT, it's Epic or Cerner. In HR, it's Workday. These are, a proliferation of platforms that do entry-level tasks that still need entry-level employees, right? We're not yet a robotic workforce, but we need employees that know how to work with this technology. So why aren't colleges teaching this technology? I don't know if we have representatives from college in the room, but usually we ask, does anybody teach all of these technologies? And the answer is usually no. Does anybody teach one of these technologies? The answer is often no. Right? These are the dominant technologies in their fields. So why aren't colleges teaching them? Well, there's a few different reasons. Some of it is mission, motivation. Some of it is institutional, it's systemic. The first thing we often hear is, it's not our job. Right? We're there to equip students with cognitive skills, soft skills, in order to launch them into their careers. I think that is a cynical take, given that students are putting out somewhere between $30,000 to $300,000, and they've told us what they want, right? They're trying to get employed. So I think bridging these students to the workforce is a requirement for colleges. And many think that too, and many are trying to move. And so the next thing we often hear is, we're getting there. We're trying, we've started, we're doing something, we have this program, but it's moving slowly. So an example of this might be, this is the Chronicle of Higher Ed, paper of record, how to revamp a curriculum quickly, but not too quickly. And I've highlighted some fun words like, these conditions can pose a trap, right? Beware about innovation and how quickly we're being asked to move by the market. Probably the craziest line here would be to say, do we really know that we can design curricula that train students for next-gen skill sets that they need in the market if these skill sets may be obsolete 5 or 10 years from now? So anywhere else in the market, if you refuse to do something because in 10 years it will be obsolete, you will go out of business. Today, nobody is pushing colleges to make that decision. So you've got a movement that's drawn by committee, it's driven by faculty, and you have a refusal to move or an inability to move at the pace of the market. And then the last item, the last kind of response we often hear is, we're trying, it's not working. And this is really fair. This is actually really hard to do, right? We're all coming to these conferences to try to figure out what this looks like. And there are a lot of challenges that higher education institutions face trying to make this work. One is systemic, right? They're not organized to innovate quickly. There's a lot of different leverage by different stakeholders who slow down processes. Another is talent related. If you want to capture somebody who can build a curriculum and train students in blockchain, you are poaching somebody from the private market where they can be paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to do what they do. And you're trying to convince them to come into a different institution with a slow-moving culture, and you're trying to convince them to stick around, not for 1 year to get a feather in their cap and then move laterally, but for 5 years, 10 years. This is really hard to do. So there's been a real issue with talent retention when universities try to bring in people from the market. The other big problem, career services. And this gets to a systemic problem of who owns careers in the university. When you're a student and you want to figure out what to do next in your career, you don't go to your academic faculty building, you don't go to your college professor, you go to the career services building. It's located elsewhere on campus, it's run by career services people who are primarily career services lifers, meaning they don't come from the market, but they do have student support background. And it's located somewhere where, it's a second-tier priority. And it's underfunded, and budget has been cut since the Great Recession. So you have this second priority siloed organization whose entire job is to figure out how to bridge academics who may not care or know how to care and jobs. There's a second problem with hiring today. How technology has changed hiring that's made it impossible for young talent. And that is that hiring itself has been digitized. It's been automated. So this is 2000 versus today. Hiring managers using an applicant tracking system was at, 1%. The number here is 75%, but it's 100% for large employers. Only the SMBs, are slowly catching up. Social media is predominant in hiring, and people don't show up at job fairs. They recruit online. So what does that mean? It means every open job receives thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands, or literally millions of applications. They cannot handle this hiring deluge, right? Employers cannot sift through 100,000 resumes for every position. So they're building screens into the applicant tracking system, the ATS. They're screening out who they want to look at, who they even want a human being to spend time talking to. And those are people with technical skills. So they're screening for Salesforce, Zendesk, Workday. And if you don't have those skills, you're invisible. What else are they screening for? Well, they don't trust that colleges are preparing students with those technical skill sets that they need. And they also don't know how, or refuse to, evaluate hundreds and hundreds of people for these technical skill sets. So they're using something else. They're using experience as a proxy for skill. So today, over 61% of entry-level job descriptions require 3 years of work experience, which is an amazing catch-22. You have to know how to do the job in order to get the job. Oops, wait. I thought I'd bring back Reddit for this one. So there's a reason why if software engineering is so in demand, you cannot find a software engineering job, at least not the first job. The second job is easy, the first job is impossible. So these are twin frictions, right, that are building and creating a cycle amongst themselves. The first is education friction. It's felt on the part of candidates and on institutions. It takes time to upskill, it costs money to upskill, and most important, it's unclear how to create certainty that that upskilling actually creates a job outcome. We have a lot of nonprofits or other workforce organizations that train people but can't guarantee them a job. And you have students who are already in debt who don't know how to evaluate the trade-offs of spending more money and more time getting skilled in Workday or Salesforce. The second hiring friction is on the part of employers. Employers are risk averse. It costs money to hire, it takes time to hire, and it makes me look bad if I hire somebody who I have to fire. So they are trying to remove all risk in their hiring processes by focusing on candidates who've literally already done the job. Both of these tensions only got worse in COVID-19. So when you had many people gaining leverage and creating resignations, you start to create a world of haves and have-nots. The people who have not are falling more behind. On the education side, folks in college moved online, then sometimes in person, then sometimes online again. They face lack of support on the career side from their colleges, who are just struggling to get students online and to figure out how not to get sued. And you have this even lower perception of ROI when the college that you were supposed to attend in person moves you offline and then moves you online again. And so you start to get this compounding effect of a serious crisis of faith in the American dream as it's funneled through higher education. On the hiring side, remote hiring has made all of this harder. Not only do I have to take a chance on you, an unknown employee, but I may not even meet you before I hire you as the employer. And that makes me more likely to pick somebody who's already done the job and to pay them more to do it again than to take a risk on someone new. The other big compounding problem in the employment space is training costs. It costs a lot of money to train a candidate, and it's unclear when you train them how you keep them. If I train you in Salesforce and then you immediately leave me because churn is getting higher and move to another organization, I've lost. I've put out the money and you've left. And remote work, again, compounds this by making me need to train you in 10 other technologies you might not have touched, particularly remote technologies, right? Slack, project tracking. And so each of these problems has exacerbated through COVID. So who will fix it? So I've given enough flack to universities. We understand that there's systemic issues, there's alignment issues that are holding them back in many ways. Employers aren't doing that well either. There's movement in both spaces. Both are trying to build something new. But employers are held back, like I mentioned. They can't figure out how to train somebody and reap the rewards and retain them. And they're very risk averse about spending that money. And secondly, they face the same issues that universities do, where training is really a side project. It's not owned by the CEO. It might be owned by HR. It might be owned by an innovation officer. And that person launches a program, gets acclaim, and moves laterally to another organization where their project is forgotten. So you have real issues with who owns this problem that take place in employers and universities. So this is my artfully drawn solution. We need bridges between employers and higher education institutions. We need bridges that help capitalize on what both do best, which is train in cognitive and soft skills and hire, provide employment. And we need somebody who can bring these parties together and cross the chasm here between high school, college, and your first grade job. So what does a good bridge look like? And there have been innovations in the space. We're starting to see new bridges pop up every year. So first, it's designed backwards from the first job. So we have a massive problem in this sort of workforce, future of work world, in that we like to train people and set them loose on the world. We don't like to actually figure out what is the very small, minimum viable skill set that you need to do the specific entry-level job on day one. What will make you 100% employable? And that's the mindset you need to have. You need to design backwards from the first job. Second, that first job will require technical skills and soft skills, and we need to train both. It needs to look like technical training that's built within project teams and might even involve in-person and remote collaboration. Third, the pathway has to be shorter and cheaper than a college degree, particularly for students who've already gone through college or dropped out. We cannot ask them to go back to school for 4 years to get to their next stage in life. Fourth, it has to increase certainty. The big risk that holds students back from investing in their own education and holds employers back from taking risks on candidates is that level of certainty that it will work, that this will be a good job, that I will get it, that I will receive it, that I'll get promoted, that I'll stick around, and on the employer side, that this candidate is a good candidate. So it needs to massively increase certainty and decrease risk for both parties, for candidates and employers. And finally, it has to be held accountable to doing that. A program that doesn't do this shouldn't stick around. It should fail, it should fold. So who can build this kind of bridge? Well, today, we have got universities and employers all trying to work together in a 100,000 stakeholder chaotic mix, each of which is trying to work one-to-one. A bridge program that will work will actually serve as the intermediary between these functions and help aggregate demand that employers can't or believe they can't aggregate and access, and help aggregate employment opportunities and be able to share them with colleges in a way that's large, that's scaled, and that increases certainty that kids will get hired. So this is the first big shift. And for those of you who know my colleague Ryan Craig at UV and Achieve, I've put his book up here to give credit where it's due. His term for this industry is last mile training. And this is a bridge program that sits in between a college and an employer. It's short, it's cheap, and it trains students or candidates in the last mile, the very smallest subset of skills that they need in order to become employable. And at a minimum, that's training in Salesforce. So you don't get filtered out of the ATS, right? Your resume goes from invisible to visible. At a maximum, that's Salesforce plus team collaboration, plus employer networks, right? The ability to actually make connections between candidates and employers. And so all last mile training programs have some form of training and of employer placement, building relationships with those employers, serving as an intermediary between the two institutions. So iteration 1, bootcamps. Bootcamps used to be an interesting, newfangled idea. They're about the new normal now. Bootcamps are pretty well accepted in tech. They haven't scaled yet as an industry if you're comparing them to higher education, but they're accepted. Employers know about bootcamps now. And bootcamps have solved, or at least improved, a lot of the problems that we were talking about. They're designed backwards from the first job. They're heavily focused on that entry-level role, usually in technology, software development, full stack development. They're training in technical skills and in soft skills. I gave them 2 checks because the nature of boot camps is to drive for scale, which means every year they're expanding class sizes and they're pushing those curricula to be more and more one size fits all. So you have a natural movement towards the baseline skill sets that are required for any entry-level job, but some lack of sort of special sauce that might make them appealing to one or another employer. It's definitely a shorter and cheaper pathway. It's often 3 months. Some boot camps can be as short as a few weeks. I gave them one check because students still have to pay, right? And you're asking students to put money up after they've already often paid for college, and they've been asking themselves, is another 30 grand or 15 grand really worth my time? And how much does it increase that certainty of a good job? Well, it's better than college. The placement rates are better. It's about 70 to 80% in kind of scale boot camps. And it increases the certainty of landing a good hire. Employers do now turn to boot camps. But there are some gaps, and those gaps are largely, like I mentioned, because boot camps are trying to get to scale. They're trying to print out more candidates every year, and there's a natural threshold of relationships that they can hold with employers to get those curricula really, really tailored. The one thing I gave them strong ratings on is accountability. So every year, some number of boot camps fold. They close. And when that happens, you sort of see these headlines like, we knew boot camps were wrong all along. This was terrible. It'll never work. But that's not actually what's happening. This is accountability in a free market in action. You actually want a market where boot camps that don't serve students and employers fold. And you want the boot camps that are doing well to persist. So boot camps have actually created accountability, and you're going to see more boot camps grow, more boot camps enter the space, and more boot camps fold when they don't work. That's actually okay. We have an iteration 2. This was a little later, post boot camps. ISAs used to be, so income share agreements, where a student promises to give, say, 10% of their income for 3 years to complete a program, but pays no money up front. This used to be a newfangled idea. Again, they're now pretty much the norm in boot camps. Students can put $0 down up front and only pay for their education if they get a job in the industry that they are seeking within 6 months of the boot camp. So this has increased not only the affordability, particularly for candidates who are low income and underrepresented minorities who are risk averse, but it's also increased accountability. Again, programs that use ISAs actually have to deliver. And that means that increases my certainty as a student that I'll land a good job. I'll compare the boot camps or the boot camps plus ISAs to other options in the market today, right? There was a rage for MOOCs. I think we've sort of passed the heyday. And there's a reason, right? MOOCs are shorter and cheaper, which is great. But the a la carte model struggled to get students to A, figure out what the pathway was that got them to their first job. It was very hard to piece everything together. And B, to increase certainty, right? A MOOC couldn't promise you that you would get employed, and it couldn't promise an employer that you were a great hire. Potentially more controversial example, free college. What problems does free college solve? Well, it's a shorter pathway, maybe, if you've already finished and you're looking to repay your degree. It's cheaper for those who manage to make it through college and accrue that debt. It's not cheaper for the taxpayer, but it's cheaper for some people. But it doesn't solve any of the core problems that are driving underemployment of young people in this country. It doesn't improve the curricula. It doesn't increase certainty of landing a job. And in fact, it reduces accountability on the part of colleges to deliver something that gets graduates employed. So the question for the hire, train, deploy model is, what would be checks across the board? What would be a program that would be designed backwards from the job, that would be training in the right technical and soft skills, that would be shorter and cheaper, or even free, and that would create certainty, maybe close to 100% certainty, that you would get hired if you're a candidate, or that you would find a good candidate if you're an employer. So the real question is, how do you create a low or no risk proposition for candidates and employers? This is the hire, train, deploy model, and I'll explain what it looks like. But the core of the model asks, what happens if I combine a boot camp focused on training with a staffing firm focused on placement? If I do that, if I have two engines focused on training and placement that work together, what am I able to promise candidates and employers? So this is what hire, train, deploy organizations, and I've got an example here. One of my companies, I admit, Optimum. Here's what they promise. If you're a candidate, I promise you that you will come in, interview, and if you're good, I'll hire you. And you'll be hired from day one, full-time, with benefits, and I will pay you to go through a boot camp. I will pay you to spend 3 months learning the next generation skill sets that you need to know to deliver on the job. And then after you have been trained and paid to train, I promise you that I will help you find your next job with an employer. And the way that I'll do that is by getting you over that first 2 years of experience hump. I will staff you out with clients on a full-time basis, and they will try you out before they buy you. They will see if you're really good. And if you're not good, that's on me. You will still be paid full-time. Any financial losses that result of a disappointing candidate are incurred by the intermediary, not by the candidate. So what happens when you have these promises you can deliver to candidates? You can promise something else to employers. You can tell them, I will bring you vetted, skilled, trained talent that knows exactly how your organization works, and I will deliver them to you, and you can try them out for up to 2 years. We know you don't like people with less than 2 years experience. That's okay. You can try them until they get to that 2-year experience hurdle. And if you don't like them, give them back. It's on me. But I will incept you to like them over 2 years because they're going to show up and they're going to deliver and they're going to have the training you need and they're going to convince you that they're the hire that you want. And so this is what happens with these programs. Optimum is an example in healthcare IT. They're training hundreds of students on Epic, the obscure system that runs the majority of US hospitals. They train a student in Epic, they pay them to learn, and then they deploy them to hospitals across the US. Those candidates are full-time, they're paid by Optimum, and they work on the client site for 2 years. Those hospitals become comfortable with entry-level talent. And after 2 years, although often before 2 years, the hospitals come to Optimum and ask to convert. They say, this person is great, they've changed my team, I want them full-time, and I want 20 more. And so this is the pathway that exists if you put an intermediary in between the candidate and the employer, and you ask that intermediary to actually take all of that risk. Sample pathway, college graduate, joins Optimum, paid to learn for 3 months, placed in a first great job, and then after a couple years, they convert to full-time. What happens if you create this low risk or no risk proposition on the candidate side? Well, I talked about how boot camps still require payment. If you pay people to learn and you pay people to get a job that they literally can't find on the market, your applicant numbers go up. In a hot talent market where everybody's fighting for a 2-year experienced software engineer, you have thousands of applicants who are skilled, smart, and hardworking, and who no one is looking at. So you have increased applicants, you have increased diversity, and you have increased quality. Optimum has been a majority underrepresented minority cohort since day one, and they've simply done that by paying people to learn instead of asking people to pay them to be taught. Finally, if you're bringing in high-quality, diverse candidates by literally the thousands for every spot, you need good assessments at the top of funnel to make sure that you're bringing in people who are a good match with clients. And so you've got really robust top of funnel assessments that we see in every hire, train, deploy program. They're serious about grit, motivation, technical skill. They don't assess on EPIC, right? They'll assess on relevant skills that a student could have actually picked up during college. And they're assessing for, why you want to be here, right? Commitment to that pathway to a career. Because of that, you've now got, tens of hire, train, deploy providers running around the market telling people that they're more selective than Harvard. And it is technically true. Their acceptance rates are lower than Harvard. Obviously, there's a different dynamic here, and it makes me question how selective Harvard really is, not to offend anyone here. But you've got seriously strong candidates with really, really robust assessment mechanisms that are selecting people who are great and who the market has completely ignored. So this is a model we talk about, building or discovering, but the truth is in some ways this is just a rediscovery or a rebrand of apprenticeships, which have been active in Europe forever, and there have been attempts to build them seriously in the US for a long time. The model for apprenticeships looks different in every country. In Europe, it looks more like government collaboration with industries and associations. In the UK, there's a tax that funds apprenticeship, and so you've actually seen the launch of apprenticeship service providers that help employers better use their taxes, and they aggregate demand and distribute candidates across various programs. In the US, we don't have those models. What's developing is effectively an outsourced apprenticeship program. It's intermediaries operating on a hire, train, deploy model who are paying candidates to learn and then paying them to get that first 2 years of experience that they need to get any job thereafter. And it's worth noting that this is not really an emerging market anymore. Like boot camps, hire, train, deploy providers have been proliferating. It started in IT, which has the most tangible, quantitative set of skills you could teach a candidate, but it's expanded to healthcare, creative, education, sales, and there are a couple players that are providing services across industries. So this is a new market, but it's no longer an emerging market. These folks are going to build programs across industries that take risk away from candidates and employers and pay them to get that first 2 years of experience they need in whatever industry they're seeking employment in. Because this is a real market now, it's shifting the ecosystem. So employers today operate under a false sense of surplus. They have all the candidates they need, they just need to filter them. So there's too many candidates, too much uncertainty, lateral hires only. Because of that model, today, if you're a candidate, it could be a 6 to 7 year ramp to get your first great job. You go to college, you figure out how to get that first 2 to 3 years of experience, and then you have leverage. But we're already starting to see hire, train, deploy providers move differently. The first candidate that a hire, train, deployer provides, a hospital or a technology client, is received with skepticism. Can they really be good? They're very young. But the second candidate is purchased in advance. And so you have employers start to get a new sense of trust. Instead of the trust being years of experience, that trust is now that you, the training provider, have certified to me that this person is employable. And so many of the training providers have actually built their own certifications. They'll work with Credly or others in the space and certify that that candidate has gone through their training program. And the trust now is shifted to that certification that shows not experience, but actual competencies. And so the model people typically talk about is you're a Reviture-trained consultant or an Optimum-trained consultant. And that means something. The second change in the market is because employers have this level of trust, they've finally started accepting candidates that don't have bachelor's degrees. So an example of this would be Reviture, one of the earlier technology hire, train, deploy players. When they first started staffing college graduates into employers, employers wouldn't look at anybody with an associate's degree. They wanted a 4-year college graduate in computer science. Now, about 10% of Reviture's placements are associate's degrees or folks who don't have a degree. And Reviture is placing a few thousand people a year and growing. So you're starting to see significant numbers of young folks enter the industry without a traditional background. And as these players proliferate and you start to build trust that these models really work and they're credentialed so they can't be faked, you actually create trust that might not need a college degree for every person, for every job. That means candidates have a choice. College is not going away. College is an important part of the US. It's an institution that provides employment, provides citizenship, creates jobs, creates well-informed, highly cognitively skilled graduates. But not everybody needs to go to college. And today, the perception is that the American dream runs solely through college and then maybe not at all. Tomorrow, the idea is that there will be a choice. If I get into a college that is non-selective, but really affordable, and I can get that degree with low cost or low opportunity cost, doesn't take too long, that's a good bet. It gets me a credential that matters in the market and at low or no cost. If I get into a selective college, even if that college is expensive, it's probably worth the ROI. I'm willing to put up money up front to get a credential that I know creates value in the job market. But if I get into a college, and there are many that exist today that are unselective and completely unaffordable and aren't creating a pathway to my next job, I might not go to college. And this isn't totally new, right? Employers and other organizations are shifting in the market to talk about folks who choose other pathways, right? Alternative pathways. One great program, Opportunity at Work, has been talking a lot about STARS, workers skilled through alternative routes. And then you've got leading employers who are at least starting to pay lip service, and some of them are indeed finally hiring graduates of other programs that are non-four-year degrees or folks without a degree. This is a long way off from being the new normal, but the way this market changes is by creating shorter, cheaper, high ROI intermediaries that actually shift the model of hiring from employers and make it possible to hire somebody who doesn't have a degree. So I'll close on this. It's not over for higher education institutions today. There's plenty that they can do to create some of these benefits that a lot of these intermediaries are creating within their own classrooms or virtual classrooms. The first is obviously to start working with some of these providers. They exist, they create jobs, they're vetted, right? I think it's been long enough in the market that these have proven that the model works, it's sustainable. But if you want to build it on your own, design shorter and cheaper pathways. Pathways that are less than 4 years, less than 2 years. And there's a couple examples, BYU's flipped degrees, right? You earn 3 certificates, and those 3 certificates become the basis for an associate and then for a bachelor's degree, right? Think about how you flip degrees upside down and build credentials along a pathway to employment. The second is, what are those credentials? They have to be tied to technical and soft skills that are present in entry-level jobs. So that means Salesforce. It means all the boring stuff that academics don't want to touch. We need to teach. Third is embed work experience into the curricula. Get students over that first 2 to 3 year hump. So Ripen does this. They work with employers to actually embed project-based work into curricula, and there are other providers too. The pathway is to create work experience within the curriculum so that you move people closer towards that first 2 years of magical work experience that makes them hireable. And then the third and fourth, increase certainty for candidates that this works and for employers that this will get them a good hire. And if you do that, you hold yourself accountable to delivering for candidates and employers. And that means you face consequences if you don't deliver, and that's okay. So building some of that certainty, building some of the networks that create that certainty, and holding oneself accountable to those networks is an important part of this kind of build your own faster, cheaper program. So I'll pause there. I have no idea what I'm at in terms of time. Oh my gosh, we went over.